everyone, welcome back to Window Seat Studies. I hope you all are doing well. So, we were discussing about neurobiology, in which we have already discussed that how back in the date, Golgi and Ramanujail they observed our nervous system and made the conclusions and gave out the different theories. So, we also discussed the principles given by Ramanujail, the principle of the dynamic polarization, and principle of connectional specificity. So we also discussed about the structure of the neuron and how the different parts of the neuron they carry out different functions. So today we are going to discuss about different types of neurons. So we already know that the nervous system it is made up of two types of cells, the nerve cells and the glial cells. The nerve cells are the signaling unit of our nervous system, the ones which are important for the relaying of the information, which carry out the information from one part of the body to the other part of the body, while the glial cells are the ones which support the nerve cells and they provide nutrition and the protection to the nerve cells. Okay, so today we are going to discuss about the different types of neurons. So we are going to discuss the categorization of neurons, which is based on the different properties of neurons. Okay, so let's get started with the lecture. So the very first classification of neurons, which is done on the what function that neuron does. So this is the very first categorization is based on the function of the neuron. So let's learn about the functional classification of neurons. I know you must have already known about this in your high school. Okay, so you have the knowledge of those types of neurons. So let's discuss about them. So the different types of neurons based on the functions, they are the sensory neurons, motor neurons, and the interneurons. So the sensory neurons, as the name suggests, they are the ones which are going to sense the change. So they are the ones which are going to sense the stimuli. So those are the neurons which they carry out the information from the peripheral part of the body to the central part of the body, which is going to lead to the perception. Okay, so these are the neurons. Sensory neurons are the neurons which carry out the information which leads to the sensation or which leads to the perception of things. Okay, so this is quite an important point. Now I'll tell you why. Because there's a term known as afferent neurons. So sensory neurons are also known as afferent neurons, and those two terms they are used interchangeably, but there is some difference between the two terms. So let me elaborate it So sensory neurons are the ones which are going to lead to the perception. Okay, so these are the ones, as the name suggests, these are going to sense the information, while the afferent neurons, the literal meaning of afferent is towards. Okay, so the afferent neurons are the neurons which are going to carry out the information from the peripheral part of the body to the central part of the body. Okay, while the sensory neurons are the neurons which are going to carry out the information from the peripheral part of the body to the central part of the body, which is going to lead to the perception. Please mind my words. There's a difference between sensory neurons and afferent neurons. Afferent neurons, whenever I will say afferent neurons, and whenever anyone's mention afferent neurons, it only gives you information about the signal transduction, the direction of the signal transduction, that the signal is being it is being transmitted from the peripheral part of the body to the central part of the body. So let me write it here. Okay, so afferent neurons. Okay, so afferent neurons are the one which tells us about the direction of the information flow. So it tells us that the information is flowing from the peripheral part of the body. Okay, to the central nervous system, to the central part of the body. So information could be related to the brain or the nervous system. So afferent neurons just tell us about the direction of the flow of the information, but whether that it does not necessarily mean that this information is going to lead to sensation or not. Sometimes it is just an information that is going to be laid to the central nervous system, but this does not necessarily mean that this is information that is going to lead to perception of maybe touch, pressure, pain, or whatever. So it's like the afferent neurons, it is the big group, and the sensory neurons is subset of it. Okay, so all of the sensory neurons, they are afferent neurons, but all of the afferent neurons does not necessarily mean that they are sensory neurons. So sensory neurons are the neurons which leads to the perception of things. So whenever there is sensation involved by a certain neuron, that neurons are known as sensory neurons, while the afferent neurons are the neurons which carry out the information from the periphery to central nervous system. So why are those terms used interchangeably? Because the sensory neurons are going to carry out the information from the peripheral part of the body to the central part of the body, which is going to lead to the perception. Okay, I hope it is clear to you all, and that is why we also call the sensory neurons as the afferent neurons. Okay, so all of the sensory neurons are the afferent neurons because they are going to lead to sensation, and that information flow is from the periphery to the central nervous system. But it does not necessarily mean that all of the afferent neurons are the sensory neurons. So vice versa is not true. Okay, let me repeat it. Say all of the sensory neurons are the afferent neurons. Okay, so sensory neurons are the afferent neurons, but all of the afferent neurons does not necessarily mean that they are sensory in nature. Okay, I hope that is clear to you all. So the second type of the neurons is the motor neurons. Okay, so motor neurons are the neurons which are going to carry out the commands that are sent by our brain or our spinal cord. So those neurons are, they are going to carry out the information from the central nervous system to the periphery, and that is why we call them as the efferent neuron. Efferent means, okay, efferent neurons means they are going to carry out the information from the central nervous system to the periphery. Okay, so from the central nervous system to the periphery. So such neurons are known as efferent neurons, and the motor neurons are the neurons which are going to carry out the commands which are sent by the brain or spinal cord, and this command is sent to either muscle or some gland. Okay, so such neurons which are going to relay the information which is sent by brain or spinal cord, they are known as motor neurons. Then there is the third category known as interneurons. So those neurons are the neurons which form the connections between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. So as the name suggests, interneurons. So these are the neurons which are found in between of those two neurons. So they carry out the information. They are kind of connecting link between the sensory neurons and the motor neurons. So the interneurons, they are of two different types. The relay interneurons. Okay, let me write it again. So the relay interneurons and the local interneurons. Okay, so the interneurons, the relay interneurons are the ones which have long axons, and they are going to carry out the information from one part of the brain to the other part of the brain, and but the path of the information traveling is very long. So relay interneurons, they have long axons. Okay, so that they relay information over the larger distances, while the local interneurons, they transmit the information locally. So the axons size is small, so they have small axons, and they relay information from one part to the other part locally. Okay, I hope that's clear to you all. So this is how we functionally categorize the neurons. Then there is the other categorization which is based on the structure of the neurons. So when Ramanujan, he was observing our nervous system. Okay, so he found out that the neurons, they are the discrete identity. So they each neuron has its own identity, and he observed that the each neuron, the cell body has a different, so each neurons has different types of processes. Okay, so the structure of each neuron is different. So based on how many processes arise from the cell body, he classified the neurons based on the structure of neurons, and that classification is known as structural classification. So he gave out the four types of neurons based on the structure, based on how many processes are arising from the cell body. So this structural classification, this is based on number of processes arising from soma. Okay, so let's discuss about that. So the very first and the very simplest new type the very simplest structure which is found in neuron is unipolar neurons. So unipolar neurons, as the name suggests, uni means one, so they have one pole. So unipolar neurons, they have only one process which arises from the cell body. So it's like the this one process arises from cell body, and this process now can branch into further parts. So let me show you a diagram of unipolar cell. So here, this is the unipolar neuron. Okay, let's change the color. Okay, so this is the unipolar neuron. Here you can see the cell body. From the cell body, there is only one process arising. So the cell body is, it gives rise to one process, which now can branch further into different types of branches. So the single process which arises from cell body, it acts like an axon, while the processes, the multiple processes which arise from the axon, they kind of they kind of work like the receiving ends. So these are the dendrites, means these are the receiving ends. So they are going to receive the signal. So signal will be received here, and then it will be carried out on the axon, uh, uh, to the axon terminals. Okay, so the cell body which gives rise to single, only one process, and that process is going to relay the information. That is why it is called axon. So such neurons are known as unipolar neurons. So unipolar neurons, they are predominantly found in invertebrates. So that is why they are also called as invertebrate neurons. So they are found in invertebrates, but we vertebrates also have those neurons in the autonomous nervous system. Okay, so unipolar neurons, they have single process arising from the cell body. So it is very, it's quite obvious from the name. Unipolar means it has one pole, so the process which is arising from the cell body will be one. Okay, but this process can further be branched, and that branches, they act as the receiving ends. So this unipolar neurons, it is found in invertebrates as well as in vertebrates in the autonomous nervous system. So these are found in invertebrates and even in the so invertebrates, and even in the vertebrates in the autonomous nervous system. Okay, the next category is known as bipolar neurons. So bi means two, so it has two poles. So obviously the cell body is going to give rise to the two processes. One is axon and other is dendrite. So it is going to give rise to two processes, axon and dendrites. So this bipolar neurons, this is quite common in our retina. So these are found in the retina as well as the olfactory epithelium. Okay, so this is found in retina as well as the olfactory epithelium. Okay, so in humans it is found in retina and olfactory epithelium. Let's have a look at the schematic of a bipolar neuron. So here you can see there's a cell body, and it gives rise to the two processes. One acts like a receiving end, dendrite, and another acts like an axon. Okay, so this is bipolar cell of retina, and it is also found in the olfactory epithelium. There is a variant of bipolar neuron which is called as pseudo unipolar neurons. So this is variant of bipolar neuron. So they look like uni they look like they have single branch. Okay, but actually they are the so what happens is that they are initially developed as bipolar neurons, but the two processes. So let me draw it here. So what happens is that those pseudo unipolar neurons are, they are initially developed as bipolar neurons. So the single so this when the this cell body, it gives rise to the two processes. So when it gives rise to the two processes, when they fuse together, it looks like it has a single process. and that is why it is known as unipolar, pseudo unipolar. Let me show you here in the diagram itself. So what happens is that the cell body gives rise to, initially it gives rise to the two processes. So initially they develop as a bipolar neuron, but the two processes they fuse into the single process. So at the end of the development, you can see that the single process is arising from the cell body, which branches further into two processes, but it looks like an unipolar neuron. So here, it just looks like an unipolar neuron. Here you can see the two different poles, but here it looks like an unipolar neuron. That is why it is known as pseudo unipolar, but it was actually previously a bipolar neuron in which the two processes has fused into becoming one. So at the end of day, the cell body is giving rise to only one process, which is clearly which is clearly getting divided into two branches. Okay, so the single process is arising from the cell body, which is then bifurcated into two processes. The one which it acts like the peripheral axon. So it acts like the peripheral axon, and other acts like the central axon. Okay, so it has the two types of axon, one the peripheral and other the central axon. And this acts like, the one end acts like the receiving end, while the other end acts like the output end. So here the all of the signals are received from the periphery of the body, and the peripheral axon, it carries out the signal from the periphery to the central part, and the central axon carries out it from to the central nervous system. So this is how a pseudo unipolar cell looks like. And it is a pseudo unipolar cells, they are found in the receptor neurons. Okay, they are found in receptor neurons, which senses the touch, pain, pressure, and carry out the information to the spinal cord. Okay, so so they are found on the ganglion of the dorsal root, so the of the spinal cord. So here you can see this particular schematic is the ganglionic cell of dorsal root. So the receptor neurons, which are going to sense the touch, pressure and pain, and carry out their information to the spinal cord, such neurons are known as, they are the pseudo unipolar neurons. So then the last type, which is known as multipolar. So this multipolar means it has multiple processes arising from the cell body, and this is the most predominant type of neuron which is found in our body. And in the last lecture, when we learnt about the structure of the neuron, that neuron was actually the multipolar neuron. So the multipolar neuron has an axon and multiple dendrites. Okay, there's a multiple processes arising from the cell body. So let me show you the structure of the multipolar neuron. So multipolar neuron is, again, it can be divided into different types. So in multipolar, not all multi, so the multipolar neurons, they are very diverse structurally, because the length of axon can vary in them. Then the complexity of branching pattern in the dendrites can also vary. So here you can see this is quite bushy neuron, where the dendrites are quite bushy and they are branched very intricately. So this is the Purkinje cell of the cerebellum, the hindbrain. And while here you can see the dendrites, but they are not as intricately branched as here in the Purkinje cell. So this is normal schematic of the this is normal motor neuron, normal schematic of the multipolar cell. Here you can see there is a single axon and the multiple branches, which acts like the receiving end for the signal. So they are the dendrites. And then this is the pyramidal cell of hippocampus. So hippocampus is the learning and the memory center of our brain. So this is very distinct structure. Here you can see a cell body, and then here you can see multiple dendritic structures and an axon. So there is a vast structural diversity in multipolar cells. So the multipolar neurons, they are the most predominant neurons found in the humans. So they are the most common ones, and they are found everywhere. So multipolar neurons, all of the motor neurons are usually the multipolar neurons. So these are the two main categorization of the neurons based on functions and the structure of neurons. But besides those, there are other categorizations as well. Let's learn about them. So the classification, so based on what type of neurotransmitter does the neuron release, based on that there are different types of neurons. So neurotransmitters are the chemical signals which are released by the neurons for conduction of the information. So there are different types, such as cholinergic neurons, which secrete acetylcholine. Okay, so the neurons which secrete acetylcholine are the cholinergic neurons. The GABAergic neurons secrete the neurotransmitter known as GABA. Okay, dopaminergic neurons secrete dopamine. The glutamatergic neurons secrete glutamate neurotransmitter. The adrenergic neurons, they secrete epinephrine, norepinephrine. Then there are other types such as serotonergic neurons, which release serotonin. Then glycinergic neurons, which release glycine. So we are not going into detail of the this classification, but again, depending on which neurotransmitter they release, whether it is going to lead to excitation or inhibition, there is other classification known as inhibitory, based on whether what kind of the output it is giving, whether it is going to inhibit it is going to cause the inhibitory action or the excitatory action of the consequent neuron. The neurons are categorized into two parts: the inhibitory neurons and the excitatory neurons. Okay, so the inhibitory neurons, they carry out the signals in such a way that the neuron which is consequent to it, the neuron which is forming the, which is at the post synaptic, so the post synaptic neuron which is after the synaptic terminal, that neurons get inhibited. So such neurons are known as inhibitory neurons, or then they are going to signal the inhibitory neurotransmitters such as GABA. Okay, while the excitatory neurons are the neurons which are going to be they are going to be the one which are going to lead to the excitation. Okay, so they are going to release the neurotransmitter which are going to lead to the excitation of neurons such as the acetylcholine. Okay, I hope that's clear to you all. We will discuss about inhibitory neurons and the excitatory neurons in the lecture when will be discussing about reflex action and all, or when we'll be discussing about the feedback loop, feed forward inhibition. We'll discuss about them there in detail. Okay, so that's not the topic of focus in today's lecture. The other categorization is based on the conductive property. So how fast the conduction of information is, depending on that there are the different classification. So the neurons which have type A fiber, type B fiber, and type C fiber. So let's quickly look what are these different three types. So type A fibers are the longest ones, so they have the longest axons. Okay, and they are myelinated. Okay, and that is why, due to the long axons and the myelination, the conduction of the information, the velocity is quite high. So they are the fastest one. So the conduction of the information will be the fastest in the type A fibers. The type B fibers, they have the small axons compared to the type A fibers, but the type B fibers, they are myelinated. Okay, so the type B fibers are the myelinated ones with small axons. So the conduction of the information, the rate of the conduction is moderate. So it's a slow compared to type A fiber. Okay, but it faster compared to type C fiber. So they show the moderate conductive velocity. The type C fibers are the ones which have small axons which are unmyelinated. So they do not have the myelin sheath, and due to this they have the slowest transmission of the information. Okay, so here we conclude the lecture. With this we have discussed all different types of the neurons, and in the next lecture we'll discuss about glial cells and we will then there will be a lecture when we will be discussing about the reflex actions, the reflex arc. We will also discuss about the feedback loop, the feed forward inhibition. Till then, see you. Bye bye.